Stugotz. Yes, that's the nothing personal word of the day. We have a sit down. We got Stugotz in person, in studio. We ripped him away from the Levitard show, and he's given us 50 minutes of his time. Welcome in, Stugotz.
Thank you, David. I am the word of the day, huh? Stugotz.
Pretty good.
There's a terrible word.
You made the word up.
I didn't make the word up. Hank Goldberg made the word up. I didn't make the word up.
Did he come up with the Gotts or the stew?
So he came up with Stugotz. It was right around the time where The Sopranos came out, and he had said to me that I was producing his show, and I thought Reggie Wayne was coming on. Reggie Wayne was not coming on the show. So Hank was prepared for a Reggie Wayne interview, and the guy who called into the hotline was Santana Moss. And so he said, "You're Stugotz. Do you know what it means?" And I said, "I have no idea what it means." He said, "Have you seen the new show, The Sopranos?" And I said, "I haven't seen it yet." He said, "It's the name of Tony's boat. Look up the meaning of it. Come back, tell the audience." So we went to break. We come back. He says, "All right, tell the audience the meaning." I said, "If I tell the audience the meaning, we're going to lose our license." And so that's the story behind Stugotz. That's how I got the name.
Can you tell me the meaning now? Or are you afraid we're going to lose the...
Cock, balls.
That's what a Stugotz is?
Yes.
And you're good with that?
My last name is Wiener.
We swore. This is almost too much to believe. 2 minutes before starting the show, I said, "Listen, are we ever going to mention that your last name is Wiener and not Gotts?" He said, no one ever mentions that. It never comes up. We are not even 2 minutes in, and you dropped a wiener.
Yeah.
That's it.
I mean, listen, my kids call me Stugotz. My daughters call me Stugotz.
Not that. Wait, you go to Northwestern. You were watching your daughter, win a national championship in lacrosse.
Yes.
And there were a bunch of people calling you cock and balls?
There were a bunch of people calling me Stugotz.
Like college women students.
They call me Stugotz. All her teammates call me Stugotz. All the other parents call me Stugotz. Everyone calls me Stugotz. Like, I'm stuck with it. In fact, I think when Dan and I started doing the show, we were kind of playing around with the idea of trying to change the show to like rid myself of everything that was Hank Goldberg, because at the time we were going after Hank Goldberg. We were trying to take Hank down. And so I think we put a vote out to the audience as to whether or not we stick with Stugotz or do something else. And the audience overwhelmingly, David, said Stugotz. Like, it was 95-5 in terms of percentage. They wanted me to keep the name Stugotz.
Versus John Wiener?
Versus another nickname.
Another nickname.
We were going to try to come up with another nickname.
So what was the poll? It was Stugotz or a to be determined nickname?
It was should we change John's nickname?
That's a terrible poll.
We weren't really good at polls back then. I'm not certain we are now. But that was the poll, and the audience, they rejected it. They wanted Stugotz. They wanted the character that was originally created by Hank Goldberg.
So you're not going to go Meta World Peace or World Be Free.
No.
You're not officially, like your last will and testament is under Wiener, not under Gotts.
It's under John Wiener, yes.
So that's important.
You have me signing my will as Stugotz.
That's how people would fight over the huge estate you have. They would say, "Look, this isn't real. This is a stamp of his signature."
So my wife, who was hung on all this time,
Nothing.
thinks she's getting something, but she's really not. I like this idea.
Let me tell you something. This has some legs.
Yeah,
you can start signing. Forget signing books,
right?
Stugotz.
Sign wills.
Sign checks. You could give people money. I'll tell you one thing. Metalark would like to do 2 Stugotz.
Yes.
It'd be void.
Yes.
Then you'd get paid even less than you get paid now.
No, that's not an option.
Yeah, I don't see how that would work. I want to get into something because we are characters in the Lebitard universe.
Yep.
Your name is on the show, but there's something that you do that interests me more than the 20 unbelievable years that you've done with Dan. I am interested in being the parent of, this is shocking because people think that I'm robotic in a lot of ways, but to be the parent of a Division I athlete.
Right.
And what it takes, because I know a lot of Division I athlete parents, and I'm trying to picture you with your daughter who won a national championship in lacrosse as a freshman.
Yep.
She's a real bona fide lacrosse player.
Yes.
And that's hard to be a parent of that, especially for a school in Chicago. My daughter went to Northwestern. I want to talk all things Northwestern and lacrosse. But tell me first, when did you know, tell me how old she was when you saw talent?
Oh, wow. So I played lacrosse growing up in Long Island. It was like a rite of passage. You had to have, like, at a certain age, everyone's walking around town with a lacrosse stick. And so it it's such a big sport where I grew up. And so I had a couple of old sticks just kind of sitting around in my garage. I played in college at Clark University. And I had these sticks sitting in the garage. And I remember when they were like, both my kids, when they were about 7 or 8 years old, I just took the sticks out because I felt like playing in the backyard. And I had 3 sticks, and my daughters asked me, Dad, they'd never seen lacrosse. I mean, we're in South Florida, and South Florida is certainly not a hotbed for lacrosse, women's lacrosse, men's lacrosse, lacrosse in general. And so I gave them 2 sticks. We started throwing around. They both took a liking to it. They both started playing on a travel team called Florida Select, and then I started coaching both of them. Rachel took a much greater liking to it than Emma did. Emma quit. She was more of a dancer. She was really good at lacrosse. Like I tell Emma all the time, had she continued, Emma would have ended up at somewhere like Northwestern.
Would she have been better than Rachel?
I don't know. It's a
Do you
good
talk to your daughters about that?
I talk to Emma about that sometimes. I don't dare tell Rachel that.
Until now.
Until now, right? Thank you. Assuming she listens to this podcast.
That's true. Actually, you're right.
Wait,
Your
so you have
secret's safe.
you have my 20-year-old daughter listening to you gasp back about Juan Soto. That's what you have her doing.
I'm going to say very unlikely.
So to finish this story off, they liked the sport. They started playing the sport. Rachel is very athletic. So is Emma. She just decided she liked dancing more. When I realized that Rachel was going to be really good, like a top 10 recruit in her class, and thank you for saying that, David, because you can't get to Northwestern. It's like the Alabama of women's lacrosse. You can't get there unless you're one of the top 15, 20 players in your individual class in the country. And so I would say when Rachel, our travel team with me coaching, really started to take off, we finished consecutive years as the number 1 team in the country. And Rachel was the leading scorer on those teams.
You say that, hold on. That's such a great statement. Under what ranking? How does that work?
So it's
talking about a travel team.
Yeah, so the problem with travel lacrosse, with lacrosse in general down here is we were beating the teams from South Florida so badly, David, that we had to go up north to play some of the better teams because that's how you got recognized. And so I was flying up, as you know, almost every weekend to places like Maryland to play M&D Black, to play Skywalker's Blue, to play all the elite teams in the country, the teams that get recruited by places like Northwestern.
Was everyone on your team able to fly north? Was there a fund? Did you guys do bake sales?
No.
Travel's expensive.
Travel,
for people who don't know.
Travel sports is very expensive, and I've been thinking about doing a podcast where I can help parents sift through all the bullshit that is travel sports because so much of it is unnecessary in terms of your dollars, in terms of your time. It doesn't matter. If you're good, you're good. If you're good, they will find you. If you're good, they'll find you. If you live in Florida, California, Delaware, Alaska, New York, New Jersey, they're going to find you. It is their job to find you. And so it is very expensive. Our parents, thankfully, had, for the most part, no issues. If there were issues, we handled it. And so there was Inside Lacrosse is a lacrosse website dedicated to all levels of lacrosse. So they would have annual rankings, and they would rank all the travel teams. And so we finished number 1 in the country back-to-back years, and the years we did, Rachel was the leading scorer, or one of the top 2 leading scorers on that team. And I knew, because I knew how good our team was, I knew all of them were going D1, and Rachel was really standing out amongst really good players. I knew right then and there, those 2 years, really, when she was like 15, 16, that she was legit, that this was going to be something that was going to take her a very long way, and it has.
Stugotz, you yada-yada'd over a lot of years, and I want to make sure the audience understands. You went from putting a stick in her hand at 7
yes.
to at 15, 16, we knew there were a ton of weekends in between, a ton
sure.
of moments for those 8 years between age 7 and 15.
Right.
The commitment that you have to make to a child.
Yes.
And when you really don't know, and what I've always been curious
it's
about
a great point,
is a
yes.
sport like lacrosse.
Yes.
When the parents of our players are having catches with their kids and getting them hitting coaches,
mm-hmm.
there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that they see.
Yes.
They see being a professional Major League Baseball free agent and making $300 million.
Correct.
What's the pot of gold at the end of a Division I lacrosse player?
This is it. She's playing at the highest level right now. There is no higher level than this. I tell people all the time that that in lacrosse, when you get to Northwestern, this is the height of lacrosse for her. She will never, ever have it bigger and better than she has it right now, even though the Professional Lacrosse League has come up with a women's league that starts this summer. It still will never feel like it feels to be on ESPN playing in a Final Four game. So going back to kind of those gap years, David, if I had to really give you a defining moment of when I knew, there was a morning where I heard a pounding against my wall.
Oh, I love this.
Like in the house, like just pounding. And I'm like, what is that? It's like 5:15 in the morning, right? And I think Rachel is 14-ish at this point. Actually, no, you know what? Earlier, she's around 12 or 13.
I'm going to have her not at 14 pounding a cross ball against a wall inside the house, I hope.
It's no, it was actually outside. I'll get to the end of the story in a second. So maybe it's like 11 or 12 years old, okay? As I get older, those years get tough to tie together, man.
Yes, they do.
You know that, right? And so I hear this pounding. My wife goes, is someone trying to break into the house? And I said, I have no idea. So I'm going to go downstairs and I'll see what's going on. And I go downstairs and it's nothing inside the house. I hear it outside the house. And so I go outside to the side of our house because there's a nice wall there. And Rachel has these spotlights set up and she's doing lefties against the wall. She's a righty. So she's practicing her offhand because Dad taught her offhand is the most important thing to master in your sport. If you can, present to a defender and your defender has no idea whether you're a righty or a lefty, that's going to help you out. If you're just going to go right, they're going to force you to go right every time. So I go out there. She has spotlights set up. It's dark out. And she is pounding a ball against the wall with her stick, just doing lefties. So I said, Rach, what are you doing? She said, now this is amazing because I am not terribly organized at all, as you know. She said, Dad, this is the only time I have to get wall ball in today. It's the only time I have to get my 300 lefties in today. So I'm doing it now before I go to school, before all the other stuff gets in the way of me getting better at lacrosse. And I went back upstairs and my wife says to me, is everything okay? And I said to her, everything's great. We have a lacrosse player. Because for a kid to wake up at that time, David, to actually think about managing their time, I don't have time to do my lefties tomorrow, right? Usually kids are doing this on the fly. She figured out the night before, I have no time for wall ball. The only time I have is at 5:15 in the morning. I don't care if it wakes mom and dad up. That's the time I'm doing it, and she did it.
I think it's the second level of what I would be happy for my kids to do. I didn't allow my kids to do swimming as an example.
Right.
Because swimming, all the practices are like at 5 a.m.
Yes, and it's very lonely.
You have to get them up and drive them to the pool.
Wait, so it's a you thing. It wasn't that?
Oh, it's a me thing. 100%.
Your kids wanted to swim.
Not my issue. Then get in the pool and go swim. You are not doing team school swimming.
Right.
That's number one.
I'm not dragging you around at 5 a.m. Right.
Number two.
Great, Dad.
Ice hockey.
Yes.
Nope. Because all the practices are 2 a.m. at the rinks.
Yes, and very expensive, by the way.
Out.
Yes,
So
all the
you can't
equipment.
do that. So I said, here's how it's going to go. Oh, by the way, travel?
Yes.
Nope. The only travel sport you can do is when someone else will take you traveling, like dance, where
Right.
they go to
Yes.
a recital in like Orlando for a weekend.
Yes.
But my son, who played up to varsity baseball at school in South Florida,
Right.
We never put him in travel ball because I did not want to be schlepping because I was comparing myself to Mike Hill, whose son was in travel ball.
Yes.
It's outrageous.
Yes, and you've seen
Every weekend.
and you've seen me go through it. It's
I don't know how you
it's
work
taking
a full
years off
week.
of my life. Yes.
Well, evidence right
Yes.
here.
Yes.
You look amazing, sort of.
No, I
you
used to look
like
better.
a parent of travel ball kids.
I used to listen. I used to look like George Clooney.
So where does it go now, though? When you talk to Rachel,
Yes.
and this is something that I think about, is segueing kids who are used to overachieving and being the best, being on TV. They've hit the pinnacle. Now she has to transition into a world where that becomes part of your story, part of your conversation.
Yes.
But it's not any sort of currency anymore.
No.
Unless you want to stay as a coach, if you want to go to school as a coach, et cetera.
Right.
Does she talk to you about that transition yet, or is she still too in it?
I think she's too in it right now to when you go to Northwest. And what I explained to her is, Rachel, you're at Alabama. One of the tricky things with this transition and it is for a lot of kids and a lot of parents as well. Rachel was one of the stars of her team forever. There was no scenario in which I was sitting, benching Rachel. She wasn't watching other players. She was always on the field. She was one of the best players. And when she got to Northwestern, she realized, and I gave her the example of Alabama, where Jalen Hurts, Tua had to sit behind Jalen Hurts before Tua got the opportunity. And I said, that's what you chose. You chose difficult. You didn't choose easy. You chose difficult. And difficult is the better path because it's more rewarding once you finally actually get there. And I'm a big believer that you have to go through some adversity in life. And so this is the first time she has gone through some adversity as compared to other kids who are going through real adversity. The hard part about the transition was explaining to Rachel, because she wasn't starting. She barely played her freshman year. She won a national championship ring. That was great. But you know kids and you know athletes. They want to be the reason your team wins a national championship. They don't want to be cheering on the sidelines watching the team win a national championship. Now, it was a great experience. Rachel loved it. But that was the toughest transition for her as a kid and me as a father, was kind of explaining to her the ups and downs of her not getting the playing time that she definitely was accustomed to, which she probably thought that she was going to get because she was one of the top 5 players in her position at the country. So in the country. So that transition was a very difficult one for me, very difficult one for Rachel, a very difficult one for my wife as well, because I think my wife just expected her, hey, she's great, she's Northwestern, 50 goals, let's go. And so that part has been tricky. That part has been hard. But it's also been rewarding because we have been forced to have conversations with Rachel that we never had to have before. And those are very important conversations to have.
And there's another transition coming.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that one will dwarf the one that you had being a freshman from going from high school to college.
Yes.
Because it's funny the job we have where we are paid to talk into a microphone.
Yep.
And I came from a job where there was plenty of ego satiation. And it's a strange thing when you become one of a group versus someone who is looked at as a superb individual.
Yes.
And it's funny as a parent, the way you are on screen as part of the Le Batard universe and the way you have to be with your family and with your daughters.
Yeah.
Do they ever get mixed up in the character versus the reality?
That's a great question. They love the character. They do. Once they realized that the boys loved the character, they started to love my character. Once they realized it was going to help them get little perks, it was going to help them, with this and that, they love the character. They don't like when the character embarrasses them, though. And the character frequently embarrasses them, whether it's on air or off air. There are many times, David, where they just want dad. They just want, because they know this is an exaggerated version of who I am. They know who I really am. And that's who they want most of the time because that's what they need. They're my daughters. And so I have to turn it on and off. They're okay with it. They're okay with it if it benefits them. Okay, they have learned from the master.
That's
right?
Such a great way.
Yes.
They're little Stugotzes.
Right.
So they've learned to game the celebrity system.
They learned how to game their dad. Yes. So if Stugotz can help them get into a concert they couldn't get into, then they love Stugotz. If Stugotz is being a moron in front of their friends, no, get back to being dad. Make sense?
So the way to deal with that, as I ponder your situation.
Oh, I am trapped in this character, David.
There's nothing. How do you?
And it sucks. I got to be honest with you.
How do you segue in your life as you think about?
Oh, I don't know.
You've celebrated 20 years so phenomenally with the Dan Le Batard show, and it's the typecast that goes on when you play one of the Brady kids or when you are on MASH.
Yeah.
There are God, that's an old person example. Sorry, Coca. But when there are examples.
Wait, Coca's never heard of MASH?
My guess is he could not name one actor.
Are you
kidding?
Get out of here.
Coca, can you name one of the people who starred in MASH, the TV show? No, we cannot.
Okay. I mean, you should be fired for that.
Quite the opposite. The reason why I love Coca
Coca.
is that he is not me.
Right.
So we don't bring the same thing,
right.
Which is the partnership that works, and it's worked for nothing personal. Your partnership with Dan is also similar in that way. You two bring different skill sets to the partnership. And as you think about your life as Stugotz, you just said something that I don't want to not talk about, which is you feel trapped.
Yeah.
As Stugotz.
I do.
That can't feel good.
No
matter how much you love him, it can't feel good.
Love him. Within the industry, I feel like I am to an extent, trapped in this character, and it's worked out well for me, David. Like, I try to see all the positives in everything that Dan and I have done. It got me to ESPN. It's made me a lot of money. It's made me extremely popular. And so I do try to see all the positives. When I set out and I wanted to be in this business, I fancied myself as someone who could do what Mike Greenberg does. In fact, I remember one of our first meetings with ESPN where Dan was trying to make the point to all the executives at ESPN, to me, he's Stugotz. But to you, he could be anyone you want him to be. Because Dan believed in my abilities to be able to do this with or without him, to Dan's credit. He did say that to them. I feel like I'm trapped now because we're 20 years in. And if, maybe people question, because I'm so deep into the character, as to whether or not I could drive a show and do so and have success driving that show. I know that I can. I don't know if I'll ever get those opportunities because I am trapped in this.
It's interesting. Yeah. Billy Joel is who I'm thinking about right now, where he's paid to play the hits.
Yeah.
He goes on tour. Yeah. People want to hear the song, not the concert version. They want to hear it exactly as they heard it on the radio, and that was on the album.
Yes.
He came up with a new song called Turn the Lights On. He put it in 2 shows, and it never appeared again in a show, even though it's a great song.
Because no one wants it.
And no one wants it, and he embraced that. There's some people who won't tour anymore because they refuse to play the hits, and they'll only play their new stuff, and they end up like Donald Fagen in the documentary Yacht Rock, where he will not talk to anyone who mentions Steely Dan and Yacht Rock.
Yes.
You can go that direction, or you can embrace your reality. Where do you find yourself fighting with yourself about which direction to go?
All the time.
Me too.
All the time.
It's a funny one, isn't it?
You fight with yourself too.
I fight with myself
We're crazy,
all the time.
Man.
I think it's normal, actually.
Do you really?
I do think. I think that people don't talk about it or recognize it as such, but I have debates in my head all the time about, am I going to be this character with this in this interpersonal situation?
Right.
What character am I going to play?
Yeah.
How am I responding to this?
It's so hard. I know what the audience wants. They want the sports whisperer. They want weekend observations, and they want me to be a goofball, and they want me to say words incorrectly, and they want me. And I do plenty of that without anyone's help, okay?
That's not a character, folks.
That is not a character. That's John Wiener and Stugotz, both not knowing how to speak. But it's so tricky. It's a character that comes with so many rewards, but it's a character that I fight on a daily basis because it's not the way I intended to get into this business. But I will tell people this. This industry is very difficult. And you have no idea, A, who you're going to have some chemistry with. So if someone told me before, hey, you and Dan are going to be great together, I would have laughed them out of the room. There's no way. But we were great together. And we are great together. But this, it's just how you get into the industry. If you're not willing to change a little bit, you might not make it in this industry. And so I never set out to be Stugotz. It just happened organically. And once it got me into the industry and got me as a co-host with Dan Le Batard, it's something I had to embrace. It's something I wanted to embrace. And so there are so many ways that you can make it in our industry. But if you're not willing to adapt to a different personality, a stretch of your current personality, if you're not willing to make those sacrifices, you're probably not going to make it in this industry.
And even if you are, you're probably not going to.
Because, David, I don't know if I would have made it had I done. So when we started $7.90 the ticket, Dan was going to do afternoons. I was going to do middays. And I often think to myself, what if I did middays? Would I still be doing this? I don't have an answer. But I knew if I attached myself to Dan, I'd still be doing it many, many, many years later. And so here I am. But that's a sacrifice that you have to make. I guess you don't have to make it. It's a sacrifice that I chose to make. And do I think about, should I have gone in a different direction? Yeah, I think about it every single day. But I'm also grateful at the same time for what it is Dan and I have been able to accomplish.
You can be both, but it doesn't have to.
I'm torn, man.
The way you were in the past does not have to inform who you are in the future. And what you did this past year, and I'm gonna mention your book. It's called Stugotz's Personal Record Book.
Yeah.
And the way the show did it, I'm showing it, and I've talked about it on the air, and I will always talk about it on the air.
Thank you.
Because I'm in it, and so I want people to buy it.
You wrote.
Because I have no royalties. Yeah. By the way, 0.
None.
I got no payment.
I got something planned for you.
Do you really?
No.
Okay, didn't think so. But I understand why Dan would present this book in a way that continues your character.
Yes.
But
Right.
I would like to actually go outside of that
Okay. Thank you.
and let our audience understand that this is not a joke book. There are words. There are real words that you wrote. It
Yes.
is a real book about your view
Yes.
of the winners and losers of sports. And you got your friends who are also writers
Yeah.
and in the industry.
Yep.
And I'm one of them, to write a story about whether we agree or disagree with your takes.
Yes.
It's a legitimate book.
Yes.
People aren't going to give you their time or their money for a character.
Right.
They're going to give it because they view it as value.
Yeah.
And they view it as performative.
Yes.
So can you tell me about the process of this and not the BS from the show? I want to know for real.
Thank you.
Because it's hard to write a book.
It's really hard to write a book. I put a lot of work into that thing. So thank you for bringing that out, because our show did precious
No,
little of that. But we have to play it one way. It's
That's
the only
Dan's
way for us
show,
to play it.
Your
yes.
show, that's your character.
Yeah.
Here on Nothing Personal. For this sit down, I want you to be the author with me, because I want people to understand that the jocularity on Dan's show is funny.
Yes.
But that's not real life when it comes to a book.
No, and so it started with a throwaway line on ESPN radio when I was talking about Kevin Durant and him going to Golden State, and I said, in my personal record book, he doesn't have any rings. And I actually used the example that I wrote in the book to Dan. I said, imagine Michael Jordan, okay? He's trying to beat the Pistons. He's the climb. They're getting to the Eastern Conference Finals. They're getting closer. Imagine Michael Jordan being the competitor that he was and is, saying, hey, you know what? I'm tired of trying it with Chicago. I'm going to quit the Bulls, and I'm going to join the Pistons. Imagine if Michael did that.
Unheard of.
Well, Kevin Durant did. He did that. And so I was trying to explain to Dan that he joined the Golden State team that won a championship before he got there, that broke the single-season win record before he got there, that he was up 3-1 on with Oklahoma in the Western Conference Finals, and he could close out that series. And I said, Dan, Golden State's laughing at him. They don't need Kevin Durant. They didn't need Kevin Durant. They already won without Kevin Durant. And now what they're doing is they're making the team, their chief competitor, the team they have to face in the Western Conference Finals, they're making that team worse by adding Kevin Durant. I said, it's something Michael would never do. It's not in the spirit of sports. You're supposed to climb, and then you take down the monster. And I said, Kevin Durant, in my personal record book, doesn't have 2 championship rings. I didn't have a personal record book when I said that. I'm not sitting there writing down notes and keeping track of all this stuff. But what happened is from there, David, it really took off, where I just started assigning more things. I think Amin called it the greatest instrument in the history of sports radio, where you could just stash things into your personal record book, is a really funny device. And so I started coming up, and I had more takes, and then I would end them with, in my personal record book, so-and-so doesn't have any rings, like Elijah won. Like Elijah One having rings is a joke. It's a joke because Michael Jordan had to take 2 years off. Had Jordan stayed, they would have won 8 straight.
About this with you.
What do you mean? It's a joke.
He beat my Knicks.
I know, but feel good about this. The 2 of 18 game never happened for John Starks. I mean, in my personal record book.
I was there. It happened.
But in my personal record book, it did not. Okay? And so I just it kind of took a life of its own from there. And Mike Ryan.
Those are bits. Those are ideas. But I want to hear about putting them into words.
Yeah, so Mike Ryan, to his credit, tried to sit down with me, tried to get me into a hotel room, and wanted to write my personal record book with me. And for some reason, and that reason was probably me, we never got to that. We just didn't do it. Dan Stanzik called me during the pandemic. Stanzik is a former producer of mine over at ESPN and a really good friend and loves our show and loves my character. And during the pandemic, Stanzik, who has always wanted to write a book, called me and said, are you interested in doing my personal record book? And David, if I was interested in writing the book, I would have written it many, many years before with Mike Ryan. I would have written it by myself. I had no desire to write a book. None. Anyone who knows me knows I cannot sit behind a desk at a computer and churn out a book. That's just not the way that I'm wired. So Stanzik called me and I was intrigued and I said, well, yeah, I guess. Why? He said, I wrote the book. I said, what do you mean you wrote the book? He said, I took all your words, I transcribed them onto paper, and I worked around a little bit for a word count, and I tied it all together, and I think you're going to like it. So I said, send it over to me. He did. I liked it. But I had to add some of my flavor to it because it's hard to capture everything.
It's like AI?
Yes. And so I sent it back to him with top fives. I sent it back to him kind of.
You Stugotz it.
Well, you've been around me. Like, I just bounce around a lot. And so as I'm reading his version of my personal record book, and he brings up Dion Waiters over and over again, I'm like, oh, and I was actually doing this at home as I was reading it, top 5 athletes that connote something you would find in a restaurant. And so I decided just to put that in the book, and I sent it back to Stanzik. He goes, you made the book infinitely better. And so that was kind of the process. It was Stanzik taking a stab at it, him sending it to me editing it, sending it back to him. It took a lot of time. I wish I had done more, if I'm being completely honest about it.
What about the guest, though?
So the guest was a Mike Schur idea. Mike Schur is a friend of the show. He's a friend of. Is he a friend of yours?
No.
You still haven't reached out to him?
Won't talk to me.
He won't. Yeah.
Don't know how to reach out to him.
Okay.
Do you have a cell number?
I do. I do. Do you want it?
I keep asking for it.
I mean, Mike Schur introduced me to Richard Abadi. This is why the book got written, because Richard Abadi is the greatest literary agent in the United States of America, and beyond, for that matter. And so I had an offer from Triumph Books. It was not a ton of money. And Mike introduces me to Richard Abadi, because Mike Schur, who loves our show, really believed in this project and was super helpful in developing this project. He introduces me to Richard. Richard says, what's your offer from Triumph? I told him what the offer was. He said, I'll call you back in 2 hours. He called me back in an hour and a half with an offer from Random House that made me nearly fall out of my fucking seat. And that is why we wrote a book. That offer and Richard Abadi, because I couldn't say no. That and David, if you have these platforms, to be able to do something, to lend your name to something that's important to somebody else who's been helpful to you during your career, why not? Dan Stanzik made a ton of money doing this book. Dan Stanzik fulfilled a personal dream of his to author a book. Dan Stanzik wanted his name on the cover. I'm not certain Random House wanted his name on the cover, but I told them there was no book unless his name was on the cover. And so, if I can, in my final whatever amount of years I'm going to be doing this, try to help the people that helped me along the way by doing cool projects with them, I'm all in for that. Like, that's what we should be doing with this.
Tell me about the conversation about the and for people who are listening to this and not
it was going to be Dan Stanzik with Stugotz.
So it's
I was thinking about it, yes.
So tell me how that went, because those are two very different words. We're talking about John Stugotz Wiener and Dan Stanzik. Right on the cover of the book.
But do you agree?
Many books are with.
Right, I know. But if I was going for the right joke for our show, it would have been Dan Stanzik with Stugotz.
Correct.
Right, I know.
Because the with is sort of a ghostwriter. It's sort of a side beef.
Yes.
It's a side piece.
Yes.
And is, now we have to talk about allocation.
Right.
So,
your favorite topic.
I love the topic of allocation.
Who loves allocation more than you?
Oh my God, I'm a huge allocation guy.
You love a pie chart.
So please tell me how that happened, because it doesn't happen by accident.
So the with has always hurt me, to be honest with you. Dan knows this. It's always hurt me because the show is the Dan Le Batard. It's Dan and Stugotz. It's been that way for 20 years. Now, I will tell you this. The with comes with very little expectation, not a ton of pressure, and I'm good with all of that, right?
Talking about the Dan Le Batard show with Stugotz.
With Stugotz. If the ratings are great, I take all the credit. If they're bad, I blame Dan, right?
Perfect.
So the with comes with some stuff, but what it lacks is respect. And so I didn't want Dan Stanzik to feel the way I have felt for the last 20 years of doing the show with
personal.
Dan. Yes.
Think about this little word that people may look past.
And with, book. Yes.
And with.
Yes.
Sometimes little words can mean everything.
I know. And 20 years in, it drives me crazy. Like the show. I'm talking about the show now. It drives me crazy. I understand Dan wanted to do it when we left ESPN. He wanted to call it Dan and Stugotz. Mike said we have a brand for 17 years at that point. Why would we mess with it? And so we kept it the same. N feels better. It's a tiny little word, but it makes you feel like you're doing something with a partner. You're not kind of off to the side. I wanted Stanzik to feel like he was part of this. Yeah.
You know, the with can work if it's an entity that's first and not a person.
Correct.
So,
yes.
I may be wrong, Coca. The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson was it like the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon? Is that how it's referred to these days? It is with Jimmy Fallon.
It's with Jimmy Fallon.
So,
right.
but that's
This would be like Mike Francesa with Chris Russo.
so that's that when it's not
Mike
an
with the Mad
entity,
Dog.
It's Mike and the Mad Dog.
It was Mike and Chris. Yes, it was Mike and Chris. So, because I know how that feels, and again, there are positives and there are negatives to that feeling. Okay, some days I'll go months. I don't think about it. Doesn't bother me. Right? I didn't want Stanzik to feel that way.
But you did a font thing on the cover.
I don't
Can
even
we
know
talk about the font thing?
Yeah, I don't know what a font is, but okay.
You know what? Okay, a font is typeface, size of type.
If you say so.
Do you realize that your name is in bigger font than Dan's?
Well, it fucking should be.
I mean, you did it. But let's just be clear that your whole
But he got an end.
And
Yeah.
not only did you get an end, but
You got a fucking end, David.
You did. Stop swearing.
I'm sorry.
But you did this.
Yeah.
You did John Stugotz winner. You
Yeah.
did a smaller and Dan Stanzik. Then, right there in triple font, it says Stugotz, lest there be any misunderstanding about what we're talking about. This also doesn't happen by mistake. So don't tell me you didn't have a font thing. And let me follow up by telling you, Dan, forward by Dan Lebitard, it's the smallest font on the page.
Yeah, well, it should be.
I need my bifocals to see Dan's name on the cover
But
of your
they
book.
wanted Dan's name on the cover of that
can
book.
see it.
Because I didn't.
So the agreement was...
I'm like, this guy's infiltrating my book even? Like, get out. I didn't even want Dan to write the forward. I asked Wilbon first.
We're going to go to a 3 font for Dan's name on the cover of the book. Stop taping. I can't even tell you how funny
It should have
that
been
is,
smaller.
That you have an entire list of what you're going to do. Okay, I'm good. 4869. We're here with Stugotz talking about his book, and we're breaking down a cover, which, by the way, has meaning. People are buying it.
I got to tell you something. David, you know me very well. Do you think I had any say in that cover?
Somebody had to have thought about this.
Maybe it was Stanzik thinking about me. I don't know. I mean, really, he's the better Dan in my life.
I would have noticed this immediately. I think about, you say I'm allocation guy. I'm a font guy, too.
Yeah, well,
You have to pay
you're
attention.
crazy, David.
No,
Why do you have to pay attention to font? It's just font.
this is your book.
I guess I'm saying that as I pay attention to an end and a with. Right. I understand. But it's font. I didn't make any sort of statement there. I wasn't trying to make, maybe they were, but I wasn't. I would have been okay with Dan Stanzik's personal record. I'm totally lying. I would
You
not
are
been.
totally lying. Get out of your... I want to talk to John.
Yeah, I know.
Because this is meaningful.
It is.
And it's important, and there's nothing wrong with it.
No.
That's the thing. People get confused that ego and detail are negatives and pejorative, and I don't view them as that way.
You need to have some ego in order to do this and do it successfully, right? You have to. But
That's okay.
It's okay. Dan has the ego.
You do too, though.
I have an ego as well. But I think what makes our show work and what has made it work for 20 years is Dan and I are constantly making fun of ourselves. So if we're making fun of ourselves and we're telling our staff, hey, have at it, make fun of us, then everyone's in play. And I also think the other thing, David, that really, I don't know what Billy fancies himself to be or what he wants to be. Mm-hmm. I think Billy could be a tremendous host. We have all made certain sacrifices professionally and personally to help create this monster of a radio show. We're the exception. We're not the norm. People don't make as much as we've made doing this for a living. People don't last this long in this industry, and they certainly don't last this long together. And so in order to do that, you have to have a guy in charge like Dan who cares about every single little detail of the show, but also has a big ego. And you have to have guys around him who have ego, but are willing to check that ego in at the door for the sake of doing a good show.
Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band.
Perfect.
That's the
Perfect.
comp that I think about with you guys all the time.
Yeah, it's a good
and
one.
Bruce Springsteen is the boss. There is
Yes.
no question about it.
Right.
He's the billionaire.
Yes.
He owns the songs.
And everyone knows it.
And everyone knows it.
Yeah.
And the E Street Band, they're super happy.
Yeah.
That's
Super
their life. They
yes.
could have led bands.
Right.
They do it. They do separate gigs. They do side gigs, appearances, shows. They do different things.
Right.
But when the band is together, they're the E Street Band.
Right, and they're better. Like, they'll never be better apart than they are together.
Bruce tried it. People try it.
Right.
And then you come home again because you realize we may not like each other,
Interesting.
but we are better together.
We make each other better.
That's a big deal.
For whatever reason, this group of people, this ragtag 5 kids who were doing a show in a closet down in Miami, we worked well together. We just did. And I'm talking about Billy, Roy, Chris, Mike, myself, and Dan, the 6 of us. We just kind of hit lightning in a bottle. Like, I knew after the first year was a struggle, man. It was bad. I was driving the show. It was bad. Like, it was bad, really bad. Dan would tell stories about him driving around on his bike throughout his neighborhood at like midnight, 1 o'clock. Weird, right? But he was like, he couldn't sleep because he knew the show was so bad, and we weren't doing a show that really represented Miami and what Dan wanted to do. And we didn't fix it until Dan started driving the show, because I was tired of guessing what the topics are. But to your point, and I think about this all the time, David, I don't know if any of us will be better without the other 5 of us. And I don't know if I'll ever get to that point in my career where I'm going to explore that, because I know what we do is great. And it's hard to leave great, man. It is really hard.
Most bands break up. Most bands break up. Some don't.
We haven't.
Some come back together. You guys
are you surprised we haven't?
I am surprised.
Really?
Because it's so rare. It's just it's so rare in our industry,
right?
And then go to other industries where to keep a group together. Why do you think someone like Greg Popovich or the people who are long-term coaches, Mike Tomlin with the Steelers is another great example.
Yes,
where they just have been around for so long.
Interesting.
I've been in the business where you have a manager. At some point, I don't want to look at that manager. I can't. Tell me there's got to be something better.
There's got to be something better, right?
And I view the same way as being married to the same person for 60 years,
right?
Or the way you're going to be,
yes.
Or being divorced the way I am,
right?
It's funny. It's very consistent with you.
Yes.
You like the stability of the crew around you, and you're going to make it work.
I love the show. Like, listeners tell us all the time, you got me through the most difficult time of my life. The show has gotten me through some of the most difficult times of my life, when my mom passed away, and just certain things that I was going through at the time. The show, the laughter, the camaraderie, the brothership, the friendships, it got me through the show. Have I thought about leaving? 100%. Did I almost leave for WFAN? 1,000%.
They made that a bit, and that's funny when people didn't realize. It's fine, but your worth in the marketplace, it's a real thing.
It's a real thing. I love radio. I love sports. I love radio. I found the right career for me, the right industry for me, and thankfully I had success within that industry, because there are countless other people out there, and I know this, who aren't still doing it, but they're not making a ton of money. Like, it's hard.
They're hanging on by a thread.
They're hanging on. They're
hoping
hanging on
for
by
the break, hoping for the dream. It's like podcasting. People misunderstand.
Yeah.
There's no barrier to entry, but there's only a few podcasts that make money.
1,000%. The way I kind of tackle moving forward, David, is I know if we stay together and this is the end, then that's fine. Like, I'm good with that. I'm fine with that. I would like to challenge myself at some point, because you're always left with the question, did I have success because of Dan, or am I the reason? Can I have success without Dan? So I don't know if I'm going to explore that at some point or not. But the way I go about it is, if I do explore that, I know going into it, and this should make it easier for me, it's never going to be as good as it was at the height of me and Le Batard. I will never be able to eclipse that. I don't care who I do it with, where I do it, if I do it, it will never be as good as it was with Dan in the height of the Dan Le Batard show with Stugotz.
You know, there are people who say that, and it's a good crutch to have.
Yes. Because
it can convince yourself in order to be stagnant.
Correct.
When in fact, you don't know that.
Right.
You could, and you, capital Y, not you, Stugotz, but maybe you, anybody, could go out, could change jobs, could change their circumstance, could change their fortune from bad to good, from good to bad. It's just a change.
Right.
Most people just don't want to do it, and you're not scared to do it.
Because it's easy, right.
The worst thing that would happen is, your time with Dan would be the best of your life.
Right.
Maybe that's true.
Right.
But what if it's not? Can you imagine if you had a 20-year run with Dan Stanzik going around writing different books, and you become a full-time author, and there's joy in it, and there's reward in it?
Yeah, as long as he's writing the books.
He could, and you laugh. But
so you're saying there could be something better out there you're never going to know, and I might have some regret over that if I don't try it, right? Is that what you're saying?
I think about that all the time.
Like, you're saying to yourself, hey, this is the best it's ever going to be, but you don't know unless you explore to see if there's better out there.
It's people who travel to one one place, or they live and live in one house, and they keep going back to the one location on vacation saying this is paradise, but you haven't been to a million other places on earth.
But I know this industry so well, and I know, David, chemistry is so important. And what Dan and I have, you can't just recapture that with anybody, right? He and I have it. It's been built over 20 years, and I don't want to be doing this that much longer. And so it would take, we'll see. We'll see if I end up doing it. And if I do end up doing it, I think for me personally, I agree with everything you're saying. It's going to make navigating through it easier if I go into it with, just for me, for my mind, it's never going to be as good as that show was. Maybe I'll eclipse it, but I'm setting a low bar for myself because I don't want to put too much pressure on myself.
And you may be right. And what interests me about careers and what interests me about people trying to get in our business, and so many people want to be in our business and get into our business, double entendre, purposeful, is that it's way harder than people think. And I wanted to end the show talking about the degree of difficulty, because what gets lost in comedy, and I've thought this about comedic actors my whole life. I've had greater respect for comedic actors than for dramatic actors.
Sure.
It's hard to make people laugh.
Yes, it is.
It's hard to keep people's interest. I am so in debt to our audience who gives me 50 minutes a day. Your audience gives you 4 hours a day, every day.
Nuts.
Of their time. That's 1/6 of their entire day if they don't sleep.
I know.
Which is a responsibility.
Yes.
And I think that people misunderstand it, and I want to put it in the framing of professional athletes or lacrosse players. Not knowing about the 5:15 a.m., 300 lefty shots in order to improve yourself.
Right.
People just assume there's no work involved and that you just show up because that's the character.
No, the work never stops in our industry. Listen, you're a media whore now, so I called you yesterday. You had 5 interviews to do. One in a different country. You're on in Canada, man.
I'm big in Canada.
You need to slow down.
It's one of my good markets.
But you're right. It is. Is it really?
It is. I hear from more people.
Really?
I had people, when I do appearances wherever I'm doing them.
Talk hockey.
I didn't really like you, but then I started listening, and now I like you.
Yes.
And so I appreciate them and their time. And what people are interested to hear from me.
Well,
and
you get it, David. Yeah.
It's amazing, though, that people think until we talk.
Yes.
That it's all so easy.
It's not. It's constant work. It's especially doing a show with Dan, because the show never stops when you're doing a show with Dan. It literally never stops. Those sports whisperers that I did, or weekend observation, those things, they're not handed to me on a piece of paper. Like, we have to sit down, put the work in, make the jokes right. Mike and I have spent many a night writing a sports whisperer up until 2, 3 in the morning, and it never aired because we didn't feel good about it. So it never stops. You constantly are thinking about takes. You're constantly thinking about bits, ideas for the show. And you're constantly thinking about the audience, because you're right. The audience makes such a big investment in you on a daily basis. If you're not catering to that audience a bit, if you're not thinking about your audience,
respectful of them, appreciative.
Oh my God. I mean, they made us. They embraced in Miami. Think about this, David. I am everything that Miami has been trained to hate. And yet they embrace me, and they love me, and they hug me. I'm a Knicks fan. I'm a Jets fan. I'm a Mets fan. I'm a loud Long Island New Yorker. I am everything that Miami hates, and yet somehow this city has embraced me and decided, no, we're not going to hate this guy. We're going to love this guy. Because I think they know this. They know how hard I work. Like, we can make fun of it on the air, and you're shaking your head, yes, because you do too. And so does Dan, if we're being honest. We all work hard, because this thing is really hard to pull off and really hard to do and have it be entertaining. It's easy to sit there at WFAN and take phone calls. And let me tell you something. Those guys are lucky I didn't take that job, because phone calls would have gone by the wayside. Those guys are lazy doing their jobs up there. I'm serious. And they have an update anchor who comes in, and he provides 20 minutes of their content every hour. I would have gotten rid of updates. I would have taken away the phones.
Love it.
You know what? You want to be a good sports radio host? Do it in South Florida. Do it in Miami. Because no one cares about sports. And they certainly don't get, like, in FAN.
Well, you've done that, but now you do it nationally.
But you can talk Mets and Yankees, July. You can talk about them in December. There's nothing to talk about here in the summer. And so I truly
Marlins.
think no one talks
Take
about
it back. Take it back right now.
The one year you won the World Series.
Okay, we're going to end. Believe it or not, we're out of time, which I can't imagine.
But this is hard work, and I think people, and I'm glad you brought it up. People think Dan and I make it look easy. It ain't easy.
It's not easy.
It
I
ain't
want to
easy.
end with a would you rather.
Okay.
Because this is, are you human or are you not human? Ready?
Yes.
Would you rather see your daughter win another national championship or the Jets win the Super Bowl?
Oh, Jesus. Fuck.
Right now. You got 10 seconds.
I want to see my daughter win a national
You're
championship.
such a liar.
Yeah, but
Stugotz, you're a writer, you're an author, and you're a liar. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I did lie.